Hey, what's going on, WCAT listeners? Sean Kelly here, bringing you the awesome and amazing brand new radio show called Humble Faith, where normal people can discuss their normal concerns, fears, or doubts around faith with people who walk in faith every day. And I'm excited about this conversation. I've got a really cool guest on the show tonight. And on our last show, just to do a quick recap, we interviewed Adam Schlastek, who literally was a $250,000 a year plus earner who left his career to live in an RV and literally walk in Jesus's path and bring he's taking care of homeless people, he's shaving them, and we got that was our first show, and we got, and by shaving them I mean giving them haircuts. For the record, because of what Jesus did, washing his, Jesus was a servant for his people, and that's what he's trying to do. And that was an amazing show. We had a phenomenal, a lot of people gave really great responses about how awesome that show was. And I'm really excited about tonight. Last show's topic was literally how to make faith-based decisions, because that is something that a lot of normal people struggle with. And tonight is no different. We've got a phenomenal guest and a great topic of discussion. And tonight's topic of discussion is very near and dear to my heart, as it is to our awesome guest's heart, as you'll find out shortly why. And tonight's topic is all about, what does prayer actually do? And that's a topic that a lot of people struggle with, because it's like one of those things. I guess I remember going to church, right? I remember going to church prior to being, to really strengthening my faith. And I remember we'd be praying for all these different things, and I'd be sitting there thinking in my head, like, great, prayer is great, but what are we going to do about it? And I really struggled with that. And I had my doubts about if prayer did anything. And I'm going to share with you what has completely changed my mind on that over the last couple of years. But our guest is also going to share his thoughts on that. And I want to tell you more about our guest now. I have Chaz Kelly, no relation to Sean Kelly, myself, obviously. But Chaz Kelly he's an employee in my company. And ever since Chaz and I first met, we had a connection. Partly because we have a really cool last name, right, Chaz?
Yeah, sure. That's what we'll go with that.
But jokes aside, we had a faith-based connection right out of the gate, and I realized right away. I learned quickly Chaz is a student of and disciple, and he has strong faith, and I'm really excited about this conversation. Chaz, why don't you let's start off with, why do you think prayer actually does something? Because that's a lot of skeptical non-believers have that doubt, right? So what makes you so confident to have this conversation with me on St. Louis WCAT radio?
Well, Sean, first and foremost, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come on your show. I'm very grateful, and to be able to talk about faith openly in a world that's quite frankly gone crazy is still amazing to me. And so I love that we can have these conversations. We live in a country, we can have these conversations out loud, and then continue to practice Christianity freely, where that's so frowned upon in so many places, even here in the States. And so just want to thank you for bringing me on the show. Secondly, to get to the question, prayer is, you've probably seen a billion movies about people depicting Jesus or like God-like tendencies. And the first thing that came to my mind when you brought this up was that one Jim Carrey movie, that Bruce Almighty, and how he had to answer a million emails as he was acting like he was answering all the prayers that people were giving him, acting as God. And, I don't think prayer quite operates that way. But what I will say is that, prayer is an opportunity for the individual as a Christian, as a person who believes in God the Almighty and God the Father, to ring the red telephone, to say, God, I need you, and I need you here, and I need you now. And it's a direct connection there. We looked at prayer for multiple different things, but what prayer does for me as a person, and I'm sure for many other individuals, is that not only do we have confidence that God hears our cries, and God hears our expectancies and our woes and because we shouldn't be just praying in woe, but we also should be praying in celebration when things happen, and because it's a two-way street. You pray in celebration, you pray when you're down in the depths, and God hears these things, and He hears them personally. Like, one of my favorite verses on the planet, when I was a competitor, I used to write it on my arm, my taped ankles and arms. Comes straight from Psalm 18. And I'm just going to start right at Psalm 18:3, and it talks a lot about prayer. And he's like, I called to the Lord who is worthy of my praise, and I've been saved from my enemies. The cords of death can entangle me, and the torrents of destruction can overwhelm me. And the cords of the grave can coil around me, and the snares of death can confront me. But in my distress, I called upon the Lord, and I cried to God for help. And from His temple, He heard my voice, and my cry came before Him, even into His very ears. And that in that little excerpt of Psalms really depicts the power of prayer to me. The fact that it's not just an email that God's checking; it is legit a red telephone. Hey, God is listening to you, and He's listening to not only what you're saying, but your intentions, and like the reason. He knows the reason why that you're praying for these things. And the one thing about it too is that God is God. He will call a spade a spade. If we're praying for something in the wrong mindset with the wrong intentions, that's something that will also be corrected in a way that we may not understand, that only God understands. But when we pray with intention, for good and for God's will, you'll more often than not see that those gateways open up, and it might not be the doorways that you're quite looking for, but it will be a doorway somewhere.
Okay, well, let's take this tactically and talk, how prayer has affected us in real life. And that was a very powerful verse you shared. And it's, but again, if we're talking to, if the average Joe who's listening to this and has their doubts about faith and is doubting if prayer does something, they're probably reading the word and they're doubting whether that's real or not. So I think both with your story, with what you've recently been through with your wife, and with what I've been through not too long ago, in the last couple of years with my near-death experience, I think it's really important that we're able to share some of the tactical ways like prayer has affected us in our everyday life. Would you mind sharing with our audience what sort of adversity you've recently gone through with your wife, Megan, who is an amazing woman, and how prayer has helped you there?
Well, it's interesting, Sean. I've been through a lot of things in my life. My very short 32 years, I've been through a lot of very unfortunate things, and very fortunate. I've been through a lot of fortunate things too, but a lot of very unfortunate scenarios that I decided that I was going to rely on God to not be a product of those circumstances, and here I am today. But in what you're referring to, my wife and I, Megan and I, got married in 2020, and it was February 29th of 2020. It was leap year day. So we only get an anniversary every 4 years. And so
I'll save you on some wedding gifts, Like,
I know. Well, the big 1 year anniversary is coming up next year. So, but man, it's crazy. The moment we got married, the very next week, our town got absolutely leveled by a EF3 tornado. The week after that, my wife gets furloughed because of COVID. And then literally a year after that, once COVID starts to die down a tad bit and she gets her job back and, things start to feel normal, she gets the news that no one wants to hear. And that is, man, we're sorry. Your test came back malignant. You have cancer. And so my wife had stage 2 breast cancer and she fought that for 2 years.
And how old was she when she was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer?
She was right. She had just turned 31.
Wow. What I mean, it's crazy how young people are getting cancer nowadays.
Well, and the crazy thing is like here's a bunch of doctors, right, who are telling her, okay, and the crazy thing about this is that what we didn't know during her cancer diagnosis is that she was also only a few weeks pregnant with our firstborn son. So we found that out going into surgery, that she was actually pregnant with our son, who is now alive today. He's almost 2. His name is Rivers. And it is wild because the surgeon comes in and says, hey, we're going to operate on you, but we have to change your medicine because you're pregnant. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to process that. And I'm like, whoa, that's a whole nother left field curveball, right? And what, my wife and I, what the excitement, the anxiety, the fears that all come overwhelming you, you're like, we look at each other and we're a team of two, right? Any marriage, this, Sean, you really, at the end of the day, you're a team of two making decisions for a lot of other people, especially when your family grows. And we look at each other and we're like, well, honey, what do we do? Like, what do we do? And so her oncologist would explain it. She goes, here's 30-year-olds that have breast cancer. And on this island is 30-year-olds that have breast cancer. Or here's people who have breast cancer. On this island is 30-year-olds that have breast cancer. And on this island way over here is 30-year-olds that have breast cancer that are also pregnant. So we don't really know how to treat you. That was the explanation we were given going into this journey.
Wow.
So you can imagine the fear.
I can only imagine. I mean, for the doctors, because we always probably, I mean, I feel like most of us make the assumption, if I get cancer, like there's doctors who know how to treat it. But to hear that she's pregnant and they don't really know how to treat it, that would be scary, man.
Well, I got to tell you, there's a lot of, and so following this up, and I actually want to use one particular date that actually happened in the midst of this 2-year journey. Following up that news, there was a lot of tumbling downhill that happened, right? It was almost like evil was taking a shot at us in our lowest of the low and trying to prevail over our marriage and what we had spent, at that point, 5 years building upon, and trying to start out our own little family and move the kingdom forward with our family and our faith. It was almost like evil saw the door open and kind of zipped right in underneath the door, or, in the crack. And it was like one bad thing after another, Sean. It was like, we find out she's got cancer. Then we're like, oh, wait, she can't have kids because she's got to go on these hormone inhibitors. You're going to have to go see a fertility doctor. You may never have natural born kids. Oh, wait, you're pregnant, but this medicine may alter the baby's genetic, makeup. This may be bad for the baby. You may have a miscarriage. You may have a stillborn. We don't really know. We had to make a bunch of decisions based on prayer and faith in hopes that it would work out, right? And so
it was like, darn if you do, darn if you don't, no matter what. It was like worst of two evils, so to speak.
And exactly. And we were literally at this point, we're at this crossroads of both directions look like the dark and narrow path, and so we had to really wrap our minds together, because what they say, two is a church, a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. That's scripture basically saying, for the ones who may not be familiar, that 2 people together can be a church and 3 can really move mountains in faith. And the 2 of us came together and we thought to ourselves, if we just trusted our prayer and are confident in our walk in our prayer, and we do what is right because it is right by our faith, that God will not steer us in the wrong direction. And even if it isn't what we want, then we know that it was God's will, right? And so we went down this journey, Sean, of like, it was just one bad piece of bad news after another. In fact, it got to the point where we had to make the decision, are we going to actually do chemotherapy while she's pregnant, or are we going to wait, right? Because who wants to introduce chemo to the body while she's in her 3rd trimester? They say, the doctors say that it has nothing, it doesn't affect the child at all, but that's still not a risk we want to take, right? No. And so out of faith, we decided to forego her treatments in hopes that God would provide us a healthy baby and we could do her treatments after the delivery and then provide us with a healthy mama. And so we prayed really hard on that.
I can't imagine how much courage and faith that took to believe that, by putting the life of our baby first, I'm still going to be okay. I can't imagine what she wrestled with to be able to make that call.
I can't. Well, the thing is, I can't either, because I'm literally in the passenger seat on this. And by the way, the passenger seat is not is equally not as fun, because you're watching the person you love more than anything on the planet go through the most rigorous toxicity that the doctors can literally introduce you to. You're literally making yourself sick in hopes that you can cure another sickness. And watching your spouse go through that is gut-wrenching, to say the least. You pray for that the pain just goes away. You pray that she finds some normalcy in the midst of all this. And one of the things that I can tell you point blank, the power of prayer works when you work hard for it. Sean, there was a day we woke up one day, and there's a lot of things that contribute to this. Working at Car Motivators is a big plus. It just so happened that I started working at Car Motivators a week before we found out she was going to have cancer. Now, what does that mean? That means I get a little more leniency to work from home and do things the Car Motivators way. Yes, but in a way, now that we know what we know, it was almost like God was preparing me to be able to have a lot more time on my hands to take care of my family and to be a part of a company that was going to support that.
Right.
And so
any company would be okay with someone taking a ton of time off and and working from home every day to be with their sick and pregnant wife. That's true.
I mean, how many managers on the planet, like Sean, literally, how many managers on the planet? And I'm not even saying this to toot your horn, because I wouldn't do that here. Yeah, how many managers on the planet could you call up and say, "Hey, Sean, look, man, I know I need to get this done today, but she's on her third round of chemo, and today is just not good. I need to be there for her." And you say, "What are you even calling me?"
Right.
Hang up the phone and go be with your wife. I'll take care of it all. Like, how many managers are going to do that?
Well, what's more important than other than God, right? Than our family. So it's like God.
Well, what are we working for, right?
Exactly.
And so that and alone was a blessing. Now I can thank you for that. Now that and alone was a blessing. But Sean, I remember I woke up one morning. It was a Tuesday morning, and Megan had to go down to the pulmonologist. Oh no, I'm sorry. She had to go have a CT scan done to make sure that the cancer, basically post operation, because she did have to have a mastectomy. She did have to give a piece of her in order to survive, and she knew that going into it, and she willingly did so, which is part of that whole faith without works can be fallen deaf ears, right? Well, she had the faith and she put together the works, and that's a part of the reason why I can happily say that she's cancer-free today. And I really truly believe that she is cancer-free today because she was willing to do what was required in order to honor God's path for her. But I got to tell you, there was one day, and I kid you not, this was the worst day of my life and the best day of my life. She goes down to get her CT scan done, which is basically they're scanning her lymph nodes, make sure it hadn't gone metastatic. For people who don't know what that means, it basically means they're scanning to make sure that the cancer has not spread to other parts of the body, that it was just local or something like that.
They do that sort of test after they remove a tumor, right? Right.
So they basically had her mastectomy on her right breast, and then they go to do the CT scan to make sure none of it is spread to her lymph nodes, her lymphatic system. And we get the scans back, and her scans have lit up her entire chest. I mean, it is like all over the place.
You were so freaked out.
And we got the phone call that morning at like 8:30 in the morning, and it was her oncologist saying, "You guys need to probably make arrangements because she doesn't have more than 5 years to live. She's metastatic, and it's in her lungs, and it's spreading." And for 6 hours, I remember getting Megan on the phone, and I was like, baby, what do we do? And and cool as a cucumber, she goes, you know what? It's fine. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to pray over this. I want you to pray over this. At lunch, let's pray together. And let's just put everything that's happening after everything we've done, let's put it in God's hands.
I remember
and whatever
you told me about it, and I prayed on it too.
Absolutely. Oh man, we pulled every prayer warrior out of the book that we possibly could find because this was literally the rock bottom, right? This is like ground zero for us. Like you just found out that basically you were terminal, and there's no, as I would quote the oncologist, at this point, Miss Kelly, cancer will kill you. That's what she said on the phone. And gosh, it's just crazy reliving it. We prayed and prayed and prayed, and I sat on my staircase looking at pictures of my son and thinking to myself, like, I'm going to have to raise him without his mom. How does that look? Just absolutely, just an outrageous feeling. And
how long those 6 hours, how long did that feel to you?
It felt like the 40 days and 40 nights in the desert.
Wow.
And I can tell you, we sat there, and I don't think I left that staircase. And I just sat there and I just prayed, and I knew in my heart that I had given so much to God to correct this situation, and I had been working so hard, following the things that God had told me. Chaz, go out and do these things. Chaz, go out and be unashamed. Do these things. Preach these things. Do not be afraid to speak my name. And it was so humbling because you do all this stuff and you're listening to God. You feel like you're listening to God. You feel like you're doing the right things. And then you get hit with news like that. And you start to ask yourself, in a sense, in this entire, the topic of the conversation is, was prayer even working? Like, is this even working? And you start to have that questionable moment of, that human moment of, God, are you even helping me here?
Yeah.
And
by the way, I want to be, I don't hold on to this because this is a suspenseful ending around what happens. This reminds me of the book of Job. And for those of you guys who are listening and aren't that familiar with the book of Job, it was really interesting how basically Job is stricken with everything that you can imagine. He loses his kids. He's sick. He's got, he was very wealthy and he lost all his wealth, and literally he is wrestling with God, and his prayers were not like his, that's what's interesting about prayers. Especially with Job's, they weren't like, God, please help me. It was like, God, why are you doing this to me? I'm faithful. But he never stopped believing nonetheless. But he was struggling with, why would you do this to me when I live by your word? And, did you find yourself going down that path? It was very apples to apples with the story of Job. And it was, I feel bad even saying that because I don't think I'm even worthy of being in that category, but like the relation is definitely there. One of the verses that I really hung on to there was out of Galatians. And Galatians 6:9 tells us, let us not become weary in doing well, for at the proper time we will reap the harvest if we don't give up. Yes.
And and that also sparked, a lot of people quote Corinthians, right, about the book of love, and love is patient, love is kind. But, I find that a lot of people fail to recognize Corinthians 13, 1 through 3. They're quick to jump to 4, where that says the love is patient. All the stuff that people plaster on their walls in their house and stuff, which is awesome. Don't get me wrong. But like, if you read the preface to that, that's where the powerful stuff is. It's like, if I could speak in tongues of many men or even talk to angels, but I don't know how to love, then I'm basically nothing, and that was very trying to me because I resonate with that. Let me give everything I got. Let me speak in many tongues of many men. Let me speak to the angels. Let me be the martyr that everyone needs to be. But what am I getting from that? If I don't love, I get nothing from that.
Yes, to me, Corinthians 13 literally means like love, like anything without love is nothing.
Right.
It's
And
powerful.
so in praying and just to kind of put the end cap on this the day that was, right? Um I prayed to God that day and I said, God, what is it that I have to do? What can I do, if anything at all, a mere mortal, do to change the circumstances, to right the wrongs? And I just got a tap on the shoulder and says, when she walks through the door, because she was coming home at half day at that point. She was like, I'm not staying at work all day. She came on a half day, and I just got this tap on the shoulder from that small, still voice that says, when she comes through the door, shower her with love, treat her like the most beautiful woman on the planet, because we all know that you know how to do that, Chaz. Do what you do best and make her feel special when she walks through the door. And I said, you know what? I can do that. And so when she walked through the door, I was literally, I was, if the doorway was like open, I was standing right on the other side. And I took her bags from her and I just sat there and I just sobbed and I just hugged her neck and just was just so thankful and grateful. I said, if it's God's will that this is it, the next 3 to 4 years is all we have left. If this is God's will, then I will be grateful for this, the 10 years that I've had with you, more than any 10-year span that I will ever live in my lifetime. And just showered her with love. And I just remember that as I was doing this, I could feel this confidence coming over me that, there's more to this story than what we're being told. And Sean, this is where rubber hits the road, right? I kid you not. Megan walks through the door. We prayed again just one more time, just for absolute solace and understanding of our scenario. 30 minutes later, we get a call from her pulmonologist. And she said, hi, is this Mrs. Kelly? And I was like, yeah, this is her. They did all the medical stuff. I need to know your date of birth, XYZ. And she goes, Mrs. Kelly, I want to call you and I want to try to offer you a little bit of relief from earlier today's news. And she was like, she and I both were like, well, good luck trying to do that, because that's going to be hard. Right. How do you get told that you're going to die and then have some relieving news? She goes, well, Mrs. Kelly, I reviewed your scans, and it turns out that there's one sickness that's involved that shows up on a CT scan that mimics the look of cancer, but really is not cancer. And I've reviewed all your scans, and all of your scans are very consistent with histoplasmosis, which is a lung fungal infection. Wow. And I can tell you, she was like, I want to bring you some relief and let you know that you're not terminally ill. You actually, your cancer is actually not spread at all. This is all just histoplasmosis. It's dormant. It's dead. We don't know where it came from. We've never seen it before, but we're going to put you on an antifungal to kill it off and get rid of the infection. But I want you to rest assured that you're not terminally ill, and you are localized, and you are cancer free from the tumor being removed and the breast being removed. And that was at 2:30 in the afternoon. So 8:30 to 2:30 was a 6-hour window where we thought that her life was going to end, and we spent nothing but prayer. Mm-hmm. Nothing but prayer and expecting God to show his face and change the circumstances that humans have given us. And he did it.
He did. That's an amazing story. So for you listeners, Chaz and his wife really relinquished control to God and asked God's will to be done. And you trusted in God and even and you battled the doubts about it, and you truly gave the steering wheel over to him, and then look what changed. Pretty amazing stuff, man.
It's a constant reminder, because Sean, you know this, I know this. We're both protagonists in this world. We constantly try to be the heroes of our universe, and that's okay, because the world needs those people, right? But it was a constant reminder that no matter how many times I feel like I've got the answers, I feel like I've got everything in my arsenal that I need. It was God's way of reminding me that if you don't take me with you, you don't have everything you need. And
You know what's interesting?
Yeah.
So, Chaz, this is such a beautiful story, and it's a testament to God's power and the power of prayer. And it's interesting. I feel like a lot of people, we have that when we're kids, and then for some reason we distance ourselves from it growing up, and then God's still there waiting for us. And case in point, I'll share, back growing up when I was about 11 years old, and my mother was diagnosed with lymphoma cancer. And I just remember that praying my heart out. I remember no, I'm not going to lose my mom to this, and praying my heart out. And after the course of about a year and a half, it seemed like an eternity as a kid, but I guess it was about a year and a half she battled it, and she ended up going into remission. And I remember truly
awesome.
thanking God. And I remember, at one point we were in church with some of my friends from school, and the priest asked me to share that story with the church. So I'm like 12 years old, and I'm sharing the story with the church, and I just remember everyone, thanking God for healing my mom, and I remember how in my heart I knew that prayer worked, and I knew God was there for us. And then for some reason, I distanced myself from God growing up. Like, you become a teenager, you start becoming, skeptical, and you want to be cool and whatever. And no one who's cool talks about faith, right? So anyway, I guess I distanced myself, and then that doubt you carry some of that with you, in your adulthood. And again, I'll talk about, even after converting to Catholicism and truly being a believer, so I could be on the same page with my wife, who was a cradle Catholic, and how, again, I'd be sitting in church and we'd be praying, and they'd be like, pray for this, pray for that, pray for our politicians. And I'm like, okay, but why don't we do something about this? Right. And that's, but check this out. And I want to share something where there wasn't any doing, but there was just prayer, and it changed everything for me personally. So this is where, this changed the game for me. And I know you're the story. You were right there with me while I was going through this. But for those of you guys who are this is only the second show, so I'm going to share what happened when I ended up with COVID. And I know there's so many people that had it so much worse than I did. And I pray for them every day, the people who didn't make it through COVID, and the people who don't make it through terminal illnesses like cancer. And I do want to talk about that, right? Because what about that when you pray for people and they don't survive? And I do want to talk about that. But here I am. So I December 3rd of what year was it, Chaz? Was it 2021? Yeah,
2021.
December 3rd. So I came down with 104.8 fever. I'm bedridden. I thought I had the flu. My wife's like, no, you got COVID. You need to take a test. I take a test. Sure enough, it's COVID. And, December 7th or 8th rolls around. I'm like 6 days in, and I can barely walk. And we go to the, what's it called? The urgent care. And then I remember there was like a 24-year-old LPN, right? So he's not quite a doctor, but he's getting close. But he listens to my chest, and his face turned ghost white, and he was like, I can't.
He knew immediately.
Yeah, immediate, man. It was like, uh-oh. And I did not like the look on his face. And then he comes back, and he's like, and he was almost shaking. And he said, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I've never heard, because I've never seen COVID pneumonia this bad in someone's lungs who's only had COVID for this short of a time. And he goes, you have really bad, severe COVID pneumonia. You need to go to the hospital right away. And you need to, and it was almost like, I felt like I was right then and there, like I was being given a death sentence. And my wife, she, it was like, she got this like adrenaline rush, and it was amazing how God empowered her to take care of us. Cause me and all three of my kids, we all had it at the exact same time. My wife was kind of resistant to it. And anyway, so I'm battling through it at home. As you know, we get she got me ivermectin, hydrochloroquine, basically all the medicines that everyone's saying.
Yeah,
Take
she did.
don't
She did a little bit of everything.
Yeah, it's like everything, right? She's like, we're gonna throw the kitchen sink at this thing. I got monoclonal antibody treatment. I got freaking what are those oxygen condensers, right? So I had 20 liters of oxygen in my nose. And about 15 days in, I tried to walk to the bathroom, and I literally, with 20 liters of oxygen in my blood, pumping into my nose, it's like sticking your head out of a car window going 60 miles an hour. Literally, I fainted, and I woke up and face down on the bathroom floor in a puddle of my own urine. And that's when I told my wife, I was like, I think it's time for me to go to the hospital. And at this point, I wasn't really even thinking about prayer. And I wasn't. I was like, because all I was thinking about was I was like, I'm gonna get back to work next week. I'll be better and I'm going back to work. And it was like my plan. And I was trying to control everything, right? Control everything like I always did. And it was crazy because then so I said literally the ambulance drivers come and I'm looking at my wife and kids and I'm like, and I just had heard hundreds of horror stories about people who went to the hospital and never came back. And how when you go to the hospital, they poison you and like put medicine that shuts down your kidneys. And I just remember I was so scared and I was so cold, like physically, my body was just freezing for like 2 weeks and I could never get warm. And I felt like someone was stabbing me in the back with ice picks. And then I get to, I get to the hospital and now keep in mind, Chaz, I think there was only 2 people up to this point that I had told, or my wife had told that I had COVID. And that was you and Amy, right, on our team.
I believe so. Yep.
At that point, and then when I get rushed to the hospital, that's when Monica posted on Facebook, and she said prayers for my husband. He just got admitted to the hospital with severe COVID pneumonia. So I get rushed to the hospital, and I'm not gonna share the whole story because there's other very spiritual things that happen, but I'll save those for another show. But I want to talk about the prayer part because the prayer part was so powerful. But what I want the listeners to understand is that, when I get to the ER, they're literally like, the alarms are going off and they're like, we're going to need to put you on a ventilator is literally what they're telling me. And they're like, your kidneys are inflamed, your organs are inflamed. That's why you have severe pain through your body. They're like, you've had, 100+ fever for 2 weeks. They're like, you're really bad off. And basically they were like, who should we contact when we put you on the ventilator? And then I had a very powerful spiritual experience, right? I fell asleep shortly after I got to feel the presence of, and I won't get into the details, but I got to feel the presence of a spirit. And it was someone who, a very dear friend who had passed away a few months prior to COVID. And she told me that everything was going to be okay. And then I had this dream, right? And I'm literally looking down at myself on the hospital bed. And I say it's a dream, but it was the most vivid experience I've ever, it's the most memorable dream I've ever had. Okay, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking down at myself in the hospital bed, and I'm in a different room than I came in the hospital. I wasn't in the ER anymore. And all of a sudden I'm flying through the air. And this was really interesting to me because my father's an astronomer, so I love space, right? And I'm literally in space, and all of a sudden I'm looking down at the earth, and it was beautiful. And it was like this amazing, it was just beautiful to see it. And then I thought I was on the moon, which was interesting because when I realized I wasn't on the moon, was when all of a sudden I was flying back towards Earth, and I looked back and I could just see this. It was a giant arm, and it was incomprehensibly large. And keep in mind, this has nothing to do with prayer, but that point on, I just started feeling like love and faith and joy. Like it was literally like love and joy and hope and everything positive that you could ever feel was just filling my heart. And Chaz, when I woke up in the hospital, and now remember, my wife had posted on Facebook. I didn't know that. I didn't have my phone with me. I'm literally in the hospital. When I got rushed to the hospital in the ambulance, I left everything at home. Like nothing at that point mattered to me except, I don't know, just trying to stay alive.
Surviving, right?
Yeah. So I wake up in the hospital, and so my body felt just completely broken. It was like destroyed. My legs felt like they were smashed with a baseball bat. My chest felt like there was broken glass in my lungs. My head felt like someone had beaten me with a tire iron. I couldn't even lift my arms. I I mean, literally, I was like losing control of my bowels laying in the hospital bed. And by the way, this whole story is mapped out in detail in the Visitor. So remember, all proceeds go to nonprofit if you pick up the Visitor by Sean Kelly.
If you weren't going to plug it, I was going to plug it because I was about to say, hey man, this whole story. If you want to hear the whole story in full, the Visitor's got you covered.
Well, thanks, Chaz. Great minds think alike. Kelly's think alike. No, I'm just joking. So but I wake up in the hospital and I'm overloaded with love and joy. And I remember I've never felt happier and more at peace. And then it's crazy because every time I would close my eyes, I would see like vividly, it was almost like I wasn't even blinking and I was looking at someone praying for me. And sometimes it was someone that I hadn't talked to in 5 years. And another time it was like someone that I had talked to 2 weeks ago. And then other times it was groups of people in a church praying for me, and they were praying for me and I could see them. And then at night when I try to sleep or during the day when I try to sleep and I would try to take a nap, I could hear them praying for me. And it was people and I'm like, man, I am freaking hallucinating. What are they putting me on? And I remember the nurses would come in and all I want to do was like help them and be there for them. And because they were trying to save me and they were saving lives. And I just remember like feeling like God's love for them and God's love for myself. And it was like the analogy I use, it's like if you had a dish sponge and you were able to take all the water from all the oceans and put it into that sponge. That's how much love like I felt like was in my heart. And it was like too powerful to control. I would burst into tears of joy just constantly throughout the day. And I just wanted to FaceTime everyone, but I didn't even have my phone. So about 2 days into the hospital stay, I get my phone back, Chaz. And Monica's post on Facebook went viral. And I had hundreds of people that just family, friends, coaching clients, people from across the country I know, people in other countries that I know, who literally were texting me that they were praying for me. There was a guy that I hadn't seen in 5 years, or hadn't talked to in 5 years, that literally heard I had COVID. And he sent me a picture of his congregation praying for me. And that was one of the visions I had seen when I closed my eyes.
Wow.
And so, you know, I will never doubt, and Chaz, this is why I'll never doubt that prayer does something again, ever. And I will challenge anyone who truly thinks prayer is useless or prayer doesn't do anything, to say that it does 100%. What that scripture you quoted earlier is 100% true. I couldn't have known those people were praying for me. I had no way of knowing, but I heard it, I felt it, I saw it with my own eyes before I even got my phone back. And that was, to me, completely life-changing. And I still don't know why God blessed me with the opportunity to know, because it's almost like not fair. People have, like, faith is supposed to be something that there's no evidence for. And I'm like, I have evidence. It like really happened to me. And it kind of freaks me out. And for the record, for those doubters that are listening to this, I also asked I asked the doctor, I was like, what medicine did you put me on that would make me hallucinate or feel? He's like, nothing. He's like, literally, you were on oxygen and what's it called? The fluid that they give you for IVs. Saline solution fluid, whatever, to hydrate you because you're fever. But he's like, we didn't, in the ER, we didn't put you on anything at that point. Now, at that point, then I had to sign off on a bunch of stuff to take a bunch of other medicine, which I did. But bottom line is this, it was unbelievable. I finally, and the last thing I'll share is when I about that story was when I kind of let go of the steering wheel. I stopped trying to control my life. And I said, God, you know what? And I remember everyone was like, are you going to make it home for Christmas? You're going to make it home for Christmas. Because remember, I came down with this, December 3rd. And it was like December 18th, I was in the hospital. And everyone's like, you're going to get home, for the Christmas. And I started telling people, I'm right where God wants me, right when he wants me there. It didn't matter where I was anymore because God was going to take care of me. And it's so funny because it's like, as soon as I did that, then the nurses, the doctors are like, oh, okay, we're going to do some tests. And all of a sudden they're like, yeah, we're going to send you home. And I got to come home Christmas Eve. It was like a true Christmas miracle, man. And that video, you can actually watch that video if you scan the QR code in the Visitor. Man, I just, Chaz, while that was all going on, like, what was life like on your side of the coin? Like, you were trying to keep the company running.
Well, for everybody listening, the story. I know Sean just put a synopsis out there for you to hear, but for everyone listening, this story goes well beyond what Sean just kind of scratched the surface on. I highly encourage you to go read The Visitor, audiobook, regular book, whatever you want to do. It is the power. It is literally the power of prayer in the most uncertain times coming through for Sean Kelly and for his people and for his family. And it's funny, you were talking about how all these people were praying for you, and like you could see them praying for you, and it's almost undeserving in a way. Like, I didn't ask for that, like, what did I do to deserve this? And Sean, you are a giver by nature, right? And so you give more than as you would always say, you make more deposits than you take withdrawals. And throughout the entire time you were in the hospital, you're right. We had to. I had a day where I was like, well, Sean may not be coming back for the foreseeable future. So if we're going to do something about keeping this company afloat and subsequently not letting it go under, I've got to step up and do something. And I felt God call me to say, man, take charge here. Take charge so that your brother in arms doesn't come back to nothing, to his livelihood destroyed because of this damned disease that is killing millions of believers, right? And I just remember God putting on my heart to be a warrior for Christ and saying, this is what's going to take. Guess what, buddy? It's going to suck. But this is what it's going to take. And if you do this, everybody will reap the benefits of it. And I just remember having that conversation with myself after praying. And it brings me to Joshua 1:9. And it's like Jesus talking to the disciples. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. And don't be frightened about what's to come, because the Lord your God is with you everywhere you go. And it's like, that hit me like a ton of bricks in your dismay. And I stood up, and I proverbially stood up, and I said, I have to do something. I can't sit on the wayside and let car motivators tank while he is on his deathbed. Even if he does survive it, he comes back to nothing, and then what happens? I will feel guilty for the rest of my life if I don't do something. And that's when it started kicking in, like, hey, let's have conversations with the right people inside the organization. Let's go talk to the clients. Let's go muster up everything we can and salvage everything we can and put our best foot forward so that when Sean comes back, it's still a well-oiled machine. And the funny thing about that is, man, is that it wasn't just us. It was the clients that you had made such a massive impact on. It was Paul Sansone Jr. It was guys like Sam Cavett. It was, it was the folks that you've made such a generous impact on. You've given them more time than they've ever given you. That came through in the time that when you needed them the most. You made such a great impact on your clients that their prayers were heard. Our prayers from the internals were heard, and that it was like, not only is he going to come back healthy, but let me tell you something else. God commanded that Car Motivators was going to be the best it's ever been post-COVID with Sean Kelly. I heard that out loud.
Well, Chaz, and so maybe to that point, maybe it's like it's the acts that you do before prayer that also can affect the outcome there, right? Maybe
I feel like there's something to be accounted for that, right? Like, I feel like there could be retroactive work there, right? Like, maybe you are putting in the works and you don't even realize you're putting in the works, that that when the time comes, a lot. Because look, for you people who are listening to this, I know Sean personally, so it's a little bit difficult, but there's not many more selfless men out there on the planet that work as hard as Sean Kelly does. I'm telling you that. if you ever get a chance to meet Sean, do it, and you will understand what I'm talking about. But there is this thing that you do, Sean, and like I said, I'm not trying to toot your horn. It contributes to the story. When you selflessly give so much of your time, you spend so much time away from your family to do what you feel like you are called to do. And you do it without fail and without question every week, every month, every year.
I don't know about without fail, my friend. I fail all the time.
Well, let's just put without fail to do it. Without fail to do it and get out there and do it. You got to think that that's being accounted for somewhere. Because you even said it yourself, in doing what you do now for a living, you took a leap of faith and you trusted that you were doing the Lord's work through your business, in order to change lives for the better, and that it's not really you, but it's the power that God had instilled in you, your spiritual gift that you have to empower others. That's what you do it so well.
I felt like if I didn't do this, I wasn't following God's calling for me. And I want to circle back to prayer on this, Chaz, because there's I had earlier I was reading in the Catholic Catechism around prayer, and there was right out of the gate it hits you with something pretty cool. It says for me, so it asks what is prayer, and it says for me, prayer is a surge of the heart. It is a simple look turned toward heaven. It is a cry of recognition and of love, embracing both trial and joy.
Right.
So embracing, meaning, think about that word. You're accepting the challenges with open arms.
Like I had said earlier, it's about prayer when times are tough and prayer when things are going great.
Yeah.
You have to accept, and you have to do both, because you got to give God the glory when he deserves it. And you got to give God the glory when you need him the most, because that's how prayer works.
Yes. It's the humility and the willingness to say, God, you're in control here, and I'm grateful for all the blessings I've had up to this point, and will get to have in the future if it's your will. And that's the thing. It's like truly giving that over to God. And I think if you And I think we have to start off every prayer with that type of appreciation and humility, for it to work. And then there's another thing, another piece of the catechism I want to share, and then I want to circle back to you on something.
Sure.
About to talk about when prayer doesn't work, but there was in the letter to the Hebrews, it talks about a part where Jesus prayed to accomplish the victory of salvation. And it's, in the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to whom was able to save him from death. Right. So obviously he's literally talking to God about how he was going to be saved from death. And he was heard for his godly fear. So think about Jesus, who's the Son of God, had godly fear. And although he was the Son, he learned obedience through what he suffered, and being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. So that's interesting, because he's the Son of God and he fears God.
Well, think about it this way, Sean, when you were growing up, who feared your dad more than you?
Yeah, no one.
Right. See, it kind of goes the same.
Maybe my little brother would be it.
Right. But and it's the same song and dance. The problem that therein lies is not everyone in the world is accepting God as the Father. They're accepting him as the person who can change my life, the person who is there when I need him, the person who may be present here and present there. But there's a lot of folks out there that are not accepting God as the true Father of mankind. And that's the difference, because Jesus Christ had already accepted that from the beginning. He knew that he was a product of his Father in heaven, and he knew what his mission was. And he knew ultimately that no matter what he prayed for, there was only going to be one way out of this, and that was death into salvation, right? And he followed through perfectly because he knew what God was capable of.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Now imagine if we, as civilians of the United States, believers, whatever you want to call it, acted with that. This podcast is called Humble Faith. Can you imagine what us as a society, if we started enacting the humble faith of accepting God as the Father and the controller of all things? What would that do to change so many people's decisions? If that was praying on your mind in every decision you made, or every prayer you
It's
prayed.
liberating. You're free from the tyranny of your own thoughts and need to control everything in life. And it is completely liberating. I can speak from experience on that. And then I still, find myself slipping into my human tendencies, but all I have to do is find myself with the time that I gave control over to God, and it's freeing. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. It's not all on my shoulders. But Chad, speaking of that, let's fit it, because we only have maybe 5 to 7 minutes left here.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about when prayer doesn't work and what the heck. So, okay, so we've shared stories where prayer positively changed the outcome for us. Let's talk about when it doesn't, right? And even in the book of Job, Job is lashing out at God, like, why are you doing this to me? And then God is like, basically God checks him, and God's like, where were you when I was basically building the cosmos, is what God says in a series of just powerful and very stern statements. But because Job never lost his faith, God restores him. He gives him everything back and then some, which, so happy ending, just like you and I have had here with our prayers. But what about when the ending isn't happy? I had a good friend and client of mine call me the other day, and he was extremely distraught. And he says to me, Chaz, he says to me, I've got one of my best friend's wife is dying of cancer. And he goes, and I've been praying for her, and it doesn't seem like she's getting better. Sean, how do I, so I'm struggling with that. So what are your thoughts on that, Chaz?
Well, my initial thoughts are, if we pray for things, we pray with expectancy, and we know that we are giving everything we have to the Lord, and we're praying with the expectancy, knowing that our works are good for it, right? That we're constantly giving our everyday life, word, and effort, per se, to God. We pray for expectancy, and it doesn't come back in our favor. A lot of times, and I've been down this road a lot, where I've prayed for something and it's not there. It's not there, and I'm like, what the heck? Why? Why is it not there? I find more often than not, we're looking too closely. I find more often than not, we're so hyper-focused in on that particular thing that we're not considering what's happening surrounding us. That maybe other doors outside of our blinders have opened up that we're not seeing. That we're so hyper-focused on one piece of something that we're not seeing the whole. And a lot of times when I've prayed for the expectancy that God provide something and He did not provide, of course, your first inclination is to question why, and because that's natural, it's human. Like, why wouldn't you do that? Well, what we don't know is what God does know, right? And we have to consider revelation in this, right? I wear it around my neck every day. I have a charm that represents this. And it helps me deal with this, what happens when prayer doesn't go your way. Revelation 1:8 says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end, says the Lord God. I am the one who is, who always was, and who still is to come, the Almighty One. And the statement that God is making there, in my interpretation, is that no matter what we pray for, or what we say, or what we do, He will have the first voice and the final voice in everything we do. No matter what decisions we make, because, like we had talked about previously before the show, like you could have a whole nother show on predestination versus free will. You could do a whole nother show on that. But at the end of the day,
Good idea.
God came before us, and God will be here after us. And when we pray and things don't go our way, we have to consider the fact that it's not that things didn't go our way. It's that maybe God had a different alternative for it. Maybe what we thought was going to benefit us really wasn't going to turn out that way. And we have to trust God's commands. We have to trust God's instincts. It's almost one of those things where, if it doesn't go your way, hey, just keep your nose to the grindstone and keep working hard, right? We're not gonna. If you're throwing darts, you're not gonna hit the bullseye 100% of the time, and sometimes you might not even hit the dartboard, And the prayers that don't hit the dartboard, it may be God just telling us to look in a different direction. I'll answer your prayer, but it won't be in this pigeonholed place where you are.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Or maybe it's God challenging us to say, turn around. Look at the places you never look, and you might find the answer from within. We preach on this all the time in our profession. We want to empower people to find the answers within. And a lot of times prayer can come off as, God, just give me the answer.
Yeah. Well, I got one for this topic too that I want to share, and it has to do with
sure.
the one of the wisdom books, the book of Ecclesiastes, and I'll share with that, and then we're going to wrap up and say our goodbyes to our listeners. And I'm grateful for everyone who's tuned into our WCAT radio show, and all those who are listening to this on the podcast channels. We are grateful for your being a supporter of Humble Faith. So thank you for tuning in. But Ecclesiastes is an interesting knowledge book. It's kind of like the dark side to Proverbs, and not that it's a dark book. It's like brutally honest. Like, it's interesting because the word Ecclesiastes and all it means like the one who speaks or the one who teaches. And and I love how like it says like the words are like a sharp stick poking you. And
quite frankly, yeah.
Like the translation kind of says it, but it talks about the march of time, right? So like time is going to keep going and we cannot stop it. It talks about how at some point we're all going to die. So we're essentially because, and this goes back to original sin, right? We made that original sin that humans did, where we ate from the tree of knowledge. Now we are in the world of chaos, and we're trying to bring God's kingdom here. But bottom line, we can't stop the march of time anymore. And then we're all going to die. And then there's the life's chance it speaks to. So even though it's God's plan, it's still for us through our human experience. It's randomness, it's chance. Mm-hmm. So with those three factors, right? It's like, it's not if we're going to die, but when and how. And
they're the only two objective truths in the entire world.
That's exactly it.
Time is not going to stop, and we're all going to pass.
Yes. So if you think about that, when it's our time, no prayers are going to change that, because our resurrection comes in heaven with eternal life if we did right by God, and and that goes back to the prayers and the actions.
Absolutely.
And so that's where I believe, again, like you mentioned earlier, it's like God's plan, and there are some things you can't pray yourselves out of because we can't anymore. We've given
and to the point of your friend's family friend or whatnot, who is battling cancer and not winning. We the only person that knows our faith journey as well as we do is ourselves, right? And so who's to say that her faith journey isn't coming to its completion?
Yeah.
Only she knows that.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the friend may not, And so, you have people asking, why is she suffering? I'm praying for her. The truth of the matter is, maybe her passing is a prayer being answered.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know what I mean? And
you're saying it's better off for her and her family because of what's happening. It's going to save a lot because it's true. God takes, like, no different than what happened with you and your wife, with me in the hospital. God takes tragedy and turns them into miracles.
Right. True. My next door neighbor, when I moved into this house, I know my next door neighbor. He's a wonderful man. Had a couple of granddaughters, and he had COVID and passed away in 3 weeks, and just like in a blink of an eye. and he wasn't here anymore. And I just remember, like, God opening a door for Megan and I to be kind of like a somewhat not foster family, but pseudo family for those kids when they'd come by and grab his stuff and move him out. The grandkids don't need to see that, right? So we'd bring them over to our house and feed them and let them watch TV and treat them like kids. And we felt like we were playing our part in answering a prayer for them in that way, even though circumstances weren't going the way that they wanted to. Just a small example of how
the Lord works in mysterious ways, Chaz.
And, Sean, at the end of the day, no matter what the world decides to throw at us, when God calls us to step up and do something about something, it could be as small as picking up a piece of trash or telling someone to have a great day, or as big as, hey, my CEO of my company's on his deathbed and I got to keep his company afloat, and everything in between. When God calls us, when we don't answer, we're not the only ones that are on the hook for that.
Yeah, and he's always talking to us, and that, my friends, is and we're going to have a show on that. And I can't wait to talk to our next guest, Tony Cassia, about that, because Tony is a guy who literally, he's got a book called 30,000 Coincidental Miracles, and it's all about hearing God's messages, and he's going to teach you, he's going to teach our listeners how God is always talking to us and how to pay attention and to find that. Of course, I'll bring the normal doubts and fears and skeptical comments and questions to the table for that one. But Chaz, I'm grateful for you joining us on Humble Faith. Thank you so much, man. Awesome conversation. I hope that some of the doubters and naysayers have heard your testimony and mine, and hopefully they're looking at prayer a little differently. And bottom line, Humble Faith listeners, thank you so much for being loyal listeners to our new show. Stay tuned for our show that'll be out in 2 weeks, where we're going to talk about those coincidental miracles. Does God talk to you? Can you really hear God's message? And if so, how? So stay tuned for that. Chaz, Kelly, you have a great night. Humble Faith listeners, thank you guys for tuning in. God bless you all.